Right, morning everybody. Welcome to FitPro's a webinar on hypertension or high blood pressure, the dangers thereof, and how we need to take it into account when training our clients, etc. This was open to everybody, not just people in the fitness industry. So there may be a few of the things that may seem almost in layman's terms, but at the end of the day, the more people that are aware of the dangers of having high blood pressure and things we should be looking for, hopefully we're reducing overall risk to society. I'm going to share the screen now. In a moment. Let's minimize this out of the way. Okay. In terms of blood pressure, we've all heard along through media and often through courses and stuff that we've been on about it being the silent killer. And that it is. There are no visible signs for hypertension other than actually getting a measurement. And most of the times, any of the little symptoms and stuff we feel are ignored purely because we're too busy. We'd rather take a headache tablet, or we feel sick. So we just ignore it or carry on with normal life. So let's go into some of the details. If we look at the World Health Organization, they define hypertension, high blood pressure, as a serious medical condition that significantly increases the risk of heart attack, stroke, kidney failure, and blindness. It is one of the leading causes of premature death worldwide. Of the estimated 1.13 billion people who have hypertension, fewer than 1 in 5 have it under control. Main contributors to the rise in hypertension are unhealthy diets, physical inactivity, a big one obviously, and the consumption of alcohol and tobacco, which at this point, while we're all in lockdown, might hopefully be reduced, so people's blood pressure might be dropping. All right, let's go back to some basics. Firstly, what is blood pressure? It is the pressure exerted on the artery walls by the blood flowing through it. The reading is expressed in millimeters of mercury, or mmHg. This goes back to the old days where your mercury or sphygmomanometer measurement system had a mercury column. Obviously, mercury being quite toxic is no longer utilized. Yeah, if someone's still struggling, hang on a second. If you're struggling to log in or it's not getting the correct loading, just try to download Zoom and log back in if you can. Some people are finding a bit of struggling with Safari. I'm not sure if anyone else is having that issue. Okay, sorry, carrying on. With regards the blood pressure cuff or blood pressure system, these days we have a number of different operating systems. Some of them are basically Android, or we also have the automatic systems that measure your blood pressure. So there are two actual pressures that we're interested in. Firstly, the systolic blood pressure, the pressure exerted on the artery walls when the heart contracts. A good reading is about 110 to 120 millimeters of mercury. We have the diastolic blood pressure, or the lower blood pressure, the pressure exerted on the artery walls when the heart relaxes or when the ventricles are filling up with blood, preparing for the next beat. A good reading is 70 to 80 millimeters of mercury. We often hear people say, okay, a good blood pressure reading overall is 120/80. The World Health Organization, in an attempt to bring that down, said a safer blood pressure was between 110 to 120/70 to 80. So they gave a bit more of a range rather than just having one fixed figure. We have a look at these categories created by the American Heart Association, Heart and Stroke Association. There are a couple of different levels. For our purposes and what we normally look at in terms of risk from a personal trainer perspective, or those of us that are actively engaging in taking clients' blood pressure or athletes' blood pressure. Systolic blood pressure, 140, accompanied with a diastolic blood pressure of 90, generally gives us a bit of a warning sign, a warning bell. If we take it on 3 successive occasions with this point, with it being elevated like that, we generally recommend that someone goes to see a healthcare professional. If someone in your presence happens to have a blood pressure anywhere higher than that, so 160/95 would be clinically hypertensive. When someone is in a hypertensive crisis, which is 180 or more, over 120 diastolic, this would be extremely dangerous for them, and ultimately they should be hospitalized or at least get to a hospital as fast as possible. So just to, if you don't mind, again, sorry, someone's got their thing unmuted. If you wouldn't mind just muting it just for the moment. Thank you. And there are two types of hypertension. Most of us only consider it as one type of one sort of classification. First, we have what we call primary hypertension. As we age, it is a natural process for our blood pressure to start increasing. There's no one reason for it happening, and we sort of accept that as we get older, our system starts to suffer from wear and tear, that it results in change in our blood pressure or elevation of normal resting blood pressure. So there's still someone in the background. If you don't mind, sorry guys, might just be confusing to other people listening. Please mute yours. Thank you. Right, then we have secondary hypertension. So this is a result of an underlying condition. When compared with the primary, it is a much more sudden onset and the blood pressure is much higher, which obviously in this case necessitates some sort of medical intervention. Right, factors that affect our blood pressure. Of the two readings, the systolic is the most reactive to our environment and is directly affected by our sympathetic nervous system. If one remembers your fight or flight response, as soon as your body is preparing to meet a threat, your blood pressure goes up to help with a delivery of blood and oxygen to working muscles, or to anything that's going to help you make less of a threat. Once again, this system releases, or your sympathetic nervous system releases adrenaline or noradrenaline, which either constrict or dilate various blood vessels and parts of the body. So in response to a threat, the blood flow to working muscles is increased, so those blood vessels dilate, but blood vessels to non-essential organs at that point in time, so your digestive system, blood flow there is constricted or reduced in order to make sure there's no drop in total volume supplying the muscles. During very stressful periods, overconstriction of these these small blood vessels in the non-essential parts can cause an increase in pressure as well. Then something else quite important here. Our kidneys produce an enzyme called renin, which in turn activates a hormone called angiotensin II. The angiotensin II causes blood vessels to constrict on its own. Okay. However, it also stimulates the release of a hormone from the adrenal gland called aldosterone, which causes salt and water retention. Of course, will result in blood pressure elevation as well. Unfortunately, the kidneys cause this reaction, but at the same time, when blood pressure increases, kidneys themselves also get damaged as their little blood vessels that supply them are affected or blocked up as well. So it becomes a bit of a, as I said, a bit of a downward spiral there. If you look down the little diagram, it says your high blood pressure is the second leading cause of kidney failure in Canada. Obviously, that could be the same in many countries. So I just wanted to check flashing lights here. I just want to make sure that everyone's okay before we continue. Here we go. Someone's mute. Just going to close that off. Thanks, everyone. This is a consideration for everybody else. Please turn off your microphones. Just look for the mute button. It looks like a little microphone symbol. It's quite disturbing to have other noise in the background, especially if you've got the TV on or something else. Right, moving on. Something else affecting the blood pressure. People with hypertension have very high levels of calcium. That's calcium ions in the cells of their smooth muscles. Now, bearing in mind that your arteries have, the artery walls are lined with smooth muscle, which facilitates blood flow. The high levels of calcium ion produce muscle contractions. And as a result, with these high levels of calcium, the contractions are more regular and the tension across those muscles is increased, which increases the blood pressure. And with time, once these blood vessels have been exposed to high levels of pressure, they start to get damaged as well. In turn, causes a further increase in blood pressure as one gets older. One thing to remember though, the artery walls are elastic, which allows them to stretch and absorb some of our pressure. So this loss of elasticity ultimately results in an increase in like we said, one of the factors with getting old, we start to suffer from wear and tear, and this loss of elasticity is one of those elements, one of those factors. So that also comes about through a lot of poor lifestyle habits, lack of activity, smoking, that kind of thing. We also combine this with arterial narrowing, which may result from obstructions, atherosclerosis, and so on. We have basically a ticking time bomb. Right, factors that can lead to hypertension. Hang on a sec. Just want to find the person with the Galaxy Note 8. Please turn off your audio. Give me 1 sec. Just want to find. There we go. Sorry about that, folks. Okay. Now we have a little bit of peace and quiet. Right. Let me take a step back there. Factors that can lead to hypertension. Firstly, genetics. Obviously, we, at this point, although I'm sure in the future it might change, if you have a history of hypertension in your family, especially direct relation, mother and father, and so on, the likelihood of you getting hypertension is quite high. These days, there are tests that enable you to determine whether you are at risk or not. It doesn't mean that you are definitely going to get it, but remember, as with any genetic test, it allows us to be forewarned. So if we know that we are predisposed to a particular condition, like hypertension, we can take the necessary steps to avoid that becoming a reality. Race. Those of African heritage also are at higher risk of high blood pressure. There's also an earlier onset. Okay, that is based on studies done in Britain. Gender, unfortunately, men are more susceptible to high blood pressure than ladies. This does change as ladies' hormones start to change postmenopausal. Then you'll notice that I've done age. Obviously, age is a factor. We've spoken about it, especially with primary hypertension. I put it in green because I do believe that even if as we get older, if we start to manage all of the variables that I'm going to list below under controllable risk factors, we are more than likely going to slow down that process, or that, not the aging process, should I say, but the associated loss of efficiency that we see with age. In terms of our controllable risk factors, minimizing our salt intake. Okay, people with very high salt intake tend to have much higher blood pressure. People that are overweight or obese, one of the comorbidities is hypertension. Diabetes. Okay, diabetes, we know that with diabetes there's often a collapse, or should we say degradation of a peripheral circulatory system, which in turn will result in high blood pressure. So someone that has diabetes is very at high risk of picking up hypertension as a comorbidity. Alcohol, excessive use of alcohol, that will increase your blood pressure. Smoking, we know, use of tobacco products. Smoking, we know, definitely hardens your arteries, so the loss of elasticity again. Stress, here, although we tend to believe that, we know that from stress from an acute perspective, your body's fight or flight response is going to increase your blood pressure. In terms of chronic exposure to stress, here there's a bit of a debate on, because a lot of people believe, a lot of schools of thought believe that most of our stress is 90% internal. So therefore, it is more of a psychological state rather than the factors outside it being an external thing. But we do know, if we had to just summarize it, all those different schools of thought, that long-term exposure to any kind of stress will result in lots of adrenaline in the system, a lot of cortisol, which directly affect blood pressure anyway. Right, potassium and calcium. Potassium, often, if we have too little potassium in our diets, will result in high blood pressure as well, and calcium as well. And lastly, possibly the one that's most important to us as fitness professionals, is the person's activity levels. We know the risks of a sedentary lifestyle are, in fact, more than smoking. So someone that smokes and exercises is at lower risk of heart disease and of the other risk factors than someone that is lean and mean but sits on the couch the whole day and doesn't smoke. So activity levels are massive to encourage, and it is a global, I suppose, in terms of risk levels, it's actually higher than COVID-19 at this point. But no jokes aside, one, in terms of actual management process of hypertension, activity, getting someone to be active again is vitally important. Other causes: obstructive sleep apnea, which is partial or complete obstruction of our airway. So people that are generally overweight will experience this, sometimes lie on their back, they actually stop breathing, and body gets a bit of, they usually shock themselves awake, or they have to have machines sensing when the person stops breathing that activates an alarm to wake the person up. Adrenal gland tumors or dysfunction. Once again, if we have anything, any sort of dysfunction of the adrenal gland, which is resulting in over production of adrenaline or noradrenaline, this, once again, as we spoke about in the very first couple of slides, affects whether blood vessels are constricted or dilated. Issues with the thyroid. Also, certain medications that we may be prescribed by a doctor, the side effect may be increasing of blood pressure, even at resting level, or some of the over-counter medications. We tend to see that with some of the flu meds. Recreational drugs such as cocaine and amphetamines should be quite obvious. We do know that there is a growing drug problem. We've even gone to the fact that, we've gone to the point where, as part of one of our pre-screening questions, is do you use recreational drugs, for the simple reason that we know that it is going to affect our cardiovascular response, and particularly your blood pressure. Then another one, which is obviously can be life-threatening here for more than one person. Here is someone that is pregnant, or a lady that is pregnant that may get preeclampsia. High blood pressure is very dangerous to both the mom and the baby. Right. What does high blood pressure actually do to the body? It can result in, as we've mentioned earlier, destruction or damage to the kidneys, kidney disease. So like we said, the kidneys themselves may be the cause of the blood pressure with their inability to get rid of salt and fluid in the body. But at the same time, because they have impaired blood flow themselves, because of blood vessels being damaged, they will start to suffer from dysfunction and get to a point where the person has to be put on dialysis. Heart failure. Once someone's blood pressure goes up, the left ventricle, or the muscles, the smooth muscle around the left ventricle, the cardiac muscle around the left ventricle thickens, which makes the heart have to beat a lot harder to contract, contract a lot harder to beat, and puts it under a lot of strain. Although we kind of think, oh, good, it's just a muscle, it's thicker. At this point, the cost of the strain on the heart to actually keep beating with that, with the thickened muscle, is significant enough to be a risk to someone's life. And one of the signs of that is chest pain or angina as a result of the ischemic state. So the heart doesn't get enough blood itself. Must remember, though, obviously angina is a warning sign. It's pain in the center of the chest as opposed to a heart attack, but it is an idea, it is a warning sign that heart attack may be imminent. Then, of course, we have heart attack and stroke themselves. Heart attack, obviously not being heart attack being of huge risk once someone's already gone past that point with high blood pressure and having angina and so on. Stroke, damage to the brain, whether it's permanent or not, will depend on the size of the bleed or breakdown of blood flow or oxygen deprivation to the brain tissue. Aneurysm. An aneurysm is where an artery actually ruptures, so the artery wall gets thinned out over time, and the blood pressure, because of the increase in blood pressure, will burst the artery. It can be life-threatening, obviously, especially if it occurs in a rather large artery in the body. If that occurred in the femoral artery, for instance, that person would bleed out. Blindness. We're not often aware of blindness being a risk of high blood pressure. But for most of you that have had a poor Thursday or lack of sleep from having kids keep you up the whole night, and you look in the mirror and you've got those road maps on your eyes, shows you the time of the blood vessels that do supply our eyes and what happens with high blood pressure. These get damaged. And unfortunately, because they're so small, once the damage is done, really difficult to repair, which may result in blindness as well. High blood pressure also contributes to metabolic syndrome. Remember, your metabolic syndrome is a cluster of symptoms like high lipid density lipoprotein, high insulin levels, increase very high waist circumference, all of these contributing to an unhealthy state. And lastly, one of the other factors that many people aren't aware of, you may, as a result of having high blood pressure, get issues with your cognition. So in other words, memory loss, that kind of stuff. And if you look to older people, they start to suffer from memory issues. And this can be as a result of small damage, small little, I often say small little strokes, but issues in the brain in terms of blood supply and oxygen supply to elements of the brain. So it may, as we said, with your primary hypertension, those factors that occur with age, this may be one of those, maybe one of the side effects of that. And lastly, in that same same theme, dementia. So it has been linked to causing dementia. As we started the whole presentation about with the introduction to hypertension, we said there are no symptoms. Unfortunately, any of the symptoms, we may have a headache or feel some level of discomfort, we will probably ignore them. Hypertension is picked up by medical practitioners when we go there for some other reason. Generally, we go there, we've got a bit of chest pain, we may feel breathless, but by the time we've got to this point, the damage has possibly been done. So how do we deal with that? First thing we need to do is make sure we check your blood pressure regularly. So for people in their 30s, it's a good time to start checking it. And if you have a family history, remember we said genetics plays a very big role here. One would go and probably start taking a bit earlier and get into a bit of a habit of taking it regularly. The other thing to do is get active. If we can get up to 150 minutes a week of activity just to keep your health ticking over. Obviously, you want to be fit, so we need more, but just get off your backside, start walking around, use the stairs, not the lift, all of those things we've heard of in the past, perhaps, and ignored. It doesn't have to be all at once. As long as you get up and walk around and a couple of times a day, the effects are cumulative. Adjust your diet to minimize your salt, also to address your weight issues. Stop smoking, control your alcohol consumption, manage your stress. Very importantly, if you're diagnosed by a doctor and put a medication, it doesn't mean you only worry about taking medication. You need to take all of the other recommendations above and put them into place as well. So as with many disorders, the idea is to manage it rather than just, it's not going to be cured. You may reduce the stress on the body with it by taking medication, by exercising, by adjusting our diets. The overall benefit may be in the blood pressure being reduced. It does say on that last slide, they monitor blood pressure at home. What we have found, people that have been medicated but haven't taken the other parts of the total solution into account, once they start exercising, once they start managing their diets and so on, their blood pressure starts to drop quite significantly. And if they've been monitoring it and recording it often, they can go back to their doctor when they're doing their 3-monthly checkups or whatever and present them with a data and say, right, my blood pressure has come down because I have instituted all this stuff. What is the chances of reducing medication? Obviously, that is for the medical professional to decide, not us as fitness professionals. But needless to say, it's a good thing to get our clients, if they do suffer from high blood pressure, to take responsibility and record the data and see how their lifestyle changes are affecting it. Then for those of us on this group that are trainers, I'm not sure what everyone else's approach is. We at FitPro advocate that as part of your assessment, you must take blood pressure and always have the old traditional blood pressure cuff on hand, because the automatic systems often glitch. And if you're not 100% sure and the person is getting a reading, it's good to be able to cross-reference between two different measuring tools. We actually had a situation last week at our place where we responded to a person who was suffering from a potential heart attack, and the automatic system that the guys had on site was actually faulty, and when we took the guy's blood pressure with the manual cuff or the manual system, we actually got much more accurate readings. So it's good to have both on site. But no, nevertheless, it's a very vital component of your assessments. Right, on that note, I know some of the information might have been stuff you already knew. Hopefully you've picked up something new. Stuff you've already known, but hopefully you've picked up something new. Remember that as trainers and stuff, as trainers and fitness professionals, we are primarily educators. So we are educating people about their bodies, about their exercise and so on. We also need to keep them up to date with this kind of stuff. Like we said, unless you've had some sort of other symptom related to blood pressure or hypertension, you're not going to know that you've got it. So it's up to us to make sure we can keep those people up to date and keep them healthy. Right, so let's go back to this. Okay, I just want to check what our chats are saying. Thank you very much. I am going to close off the chat, but you should be getting a link to this. If you don't receive the link to this, please feel free to drop us a WhatsApp or an email, and we will send you the link. But thank you very much for joining us. If you do have any other additional questions, this Zoom is going to cut us off because we have a time limit. Please feel free to send us an email. My email is derekarcher@fitpro. That's DEREK. And we'll assist you as best we can. All the best, and thanks very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.